Do you have your shot glass? We have to get into the right frame of mind for this. Okay, let me introduce John Sicard, President and CEO of Kinaxis. John has been President and CEO since January 2016, with over 20 years tenure at Kinaxis, a little over 25 actually. And he first started at the company as a key contributor in architecture and development of the supply chain solutions in 1994, you do the math, and has since held a number of senior management roles in development, professional services, business consulting, sales, marketing, and customer support. Prior to his current role, John was Chief Products Officer, overseeing all aspects of the product all aspects of the product life cycle, and including product vision and strategy. And before all of that, John was a software engineer early in his career. So both at Kinaxis and in previous roles. Is that correct, John?
That is right. That's where I started my career.
Then welcome aboard. Welcome to your first Tequila Sunrise. It's great having you here.
Well, not really my first, but maybe my first on camera like this, Greg. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. Good to have you. So I'm so glad we were able to put this together. A couple weeks ago, Duncan was on Supply Chain is Boring. And who else did we have on Supply Chain Now? And of course, we've met with Polly from Raleigh and Patrick Van Hull. So we've had the whole Kinaxis team. And of course, for any of our community who don't know, Kinaxis is an incredibly important player in supply chain tech. I'm looking at your stock today, a nearly $5 billion valuation company, just making some incredible things. We'll talk about that later, and I'll let you do it because you probably can do it much more justice than I can. So,
yeah, absolutely. No, it's great that you've had Duncan. Duncan is essentially the father,
right,
figure for our company. Yeah, as the founder and now fellow, we still hand him problems that most people don't understand, how to even start solving. He typically leans in on those. So it's
wow.
Great to still have him with us.
That's such a valuable resource to have the founding fathers, mothers, whatever around, because there's a certain inherent problem solving gift that they have to start something like this to begin with. And they just learn more and more as the years go on. And they always have a unique perspective.
Yeah, 100%.
So tell us a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, kind of how you grew up, your family a little bit, and let people get to know you a little bit.
Well, I'm the youngest of three, so last born in a military family. And
okay.
So my father was in the Canadian Air Forces. He was a navigator, flew the old CF-100s for those who remember that plane. Part of growing up in a military family is you move around a lot. I've lost count as to how many homes I lived in. It was, every 18 to 24 months, he would come home and say, "We're moving." And we'd ask when. He'd say Monday.
Right.
And off we went. So, growing up, I had to learn how to be exceptionally resilient and open to change, because it could be the middle of the school year and that would happen to us. And so, yeah, I grew up in that kind of a lifestyle. I can tell you that I'm a musician at heart. I probably feel most like myself when I'm pounding away on my drum kit to a Foo Fighters song. The harder I hit them, the better I feel. I'm also a software engineer, and those two things they're actually quite close.
Yeah.
I think software engineering is a very artistic endeavor. When I was in school, I got to grade a lot of, as a TA, I got to grade a lot of homework and pieces of software, and I really realized then how closely connected art or music even and software is. You would see lots of different, pieces of software solving the exact same problem, but some were Mozart-like.
Yeah.
And I still remember seeing those, and that really inspired me. I think, to join those two. I think it's a very creative endeavor. Yeah. So, and essentially, long story, but I'm essentially a software engineer that fell in love with the craft of supply chain. And you might say the last 30 years are history. 30 plus years I've been involved in software companies to serve the craft of supply chain.
I love that you call it a craft. First of all, I think that's a really cool way to think about it. And I got to tell you, you're not the first. You're a drummer, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Not the first drummer to be a supply chain tech person. So I have a friend. When I started a company a long time ago, Joe Ranieri, at Henry Schein, which is a big medical and veterinary supply company in the States, and they've got a Canadian operation as well. He's a drummer and a supply chain tech. I think he's still an engineer. I think he's still doing some engineering, and it is amazing how closely those two align, right?
Absolutely.
Making art out of rigor is, I mean, there's only so many notes, but you can make art out of it, and it's not dissimilar with coding. So that's cool.
Yeah, and music is as old as time, and so is the supply chain. It's as old as time.
We talked about that, didn't we? I mean,
yes, and that's another reason why I love it. It's been around as long as humanity has been around, and it will be with us as long as we're here. And so will music. They're both really important parts of life, I think.
So you don't really have a hometown, I guess, because you're a military brat. But is there a place that stands out as a favorite, or one where you had really good memories?
Yeah, Montreal is where we settled. And
okay.
Montreal is important for me. I probably consider that a hometown for me, and that's where we settled. That's where I met my wife in 1982, and my two boys were born there.
Wow.
And I still have a mother-in-law and some other family members that we visit Montreal. It's not very far away, so I would say that's the place I consider. It's also where I went to school, and I still love it. I think it's one of North America's most unique cities.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful. And the smoked meat sandwich is one of the greatest inventions of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt. And the poutine.
Oh yeah. Right.
Not good for you, but really
right. How people survive that, right? And how there's anybody in Montreal that's not 380 pounds, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you've had a ton of experiences, obviously, moving around. So tell me, is anything jump out at you that really kind of shaped your worldview, or jump started you in a certain direction, or anything like that?
Well, probably, I could talk about a pivotal moment where, I didn't mention this earlier, but when I was, a late teen and almost till I was 20 years old, I thought I was going to be a rock drummer, and that was going to be my vocation. Well, there was a pivotal moment that I experienced in, playing at a bar in Montreal and watching, a drummer that was 4 years my junior and 100 years, better than I was in terms of talent. Just an incredible musician at 16. I know, in a bar at 16, but I wasn't 16, he was.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I realized music was a labor of love, and it still is for me now. It's a huge part of my life. But I pivoted then, and it was almost quite by accident that I discovered software engineering. My father bought me a book called "Without Me, You're Nothing." It was actually the first software book I ever wrote, and it was about the merits of software in society. Now imagine this is it was early 80s, right? Very early 80s.
Yeah.
And
Basic and Fortran and all that stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah, all the examples were in Basic. And anyway, I found it quite fascinating, and I decided that I would try it. It was intriguing, and that's when, that was pretty pivotal. I was I became better at software than I was a drummer. That's for sure. And partly because, again, I felt like it was the perfect combination of creativity and science.
Yeah.
It allowed me to exercise this huge part of who I am, the creative side of me. Being able to abstract wildly challenging problems into a painting, and turning that painting into code and making it work. That was a pretty pivotal moment for my career, no question. I mean, without making that single, almost by accident um, decision, I
Right.
wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now.
Why do you think your dad picked that book?
I never asked him, and I wish I did. He and I didn't always get along. He was military. I had hair longer than most. I mean, I had like Peter Frampton hair. If you want
Yeah.
to go way back, people who know Peter Frampton is
Yeah.
anyway, doesn't have that much hair now.
Right. I know you wouldn't never know.
You see him now. You're
now,
like,
right?
well, what happened, dude? But anyway, he just got it for me and thought that maybe it was a vocation I would be interested in. Both my sister and brother are quite academic. My sister's a doctor, my brother's an engineer, and my brother incredibly gifted, almost genius type, right? And he was teaching master's degree mathematics at McGill when he was 17.
Wow.
That kind of thing. So anyway, I guess he just thought, hey, here's something that you should consider and think about. It was a very simple paperback, very thin book, something that was easy to read, but it was intriguing. So
Without me, you're nothing. Is that what
yeah, Without Me, You're Nothing. That's what it was called. And again, I'd met my wife by then, and Pina is very bright, speaks 4 languages, very academic, and so she thought, well, why don't you try? I mean, you don't know, there's one certainty: you'll fail without trying, right? Without trying, it's a guaranteed. You don't make it anywhere. So that was a pivotal moment.
Wow. And in that, at that age, right, for you to take the advice, probably a good thing that she was there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, right, anything your parents hand you without the intervention of someone else at that age, you just kind of huck it right in the dumpster, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
wow,
exactly. Yeah,
that's really cool.
I mean, I still remember I had never physically touched a computer until I was in university in computer science, and I still remember the awkward moment of walking in the lab and not knowing how to turn the machine on, and I just touching things to see if the machine would light up,
right?
Just randomly pushing buttons. And of course, then a student walked over and looked at me and went,
click,
click. Like,
idiot. Yeah, you can just hear them, right? First of all, you were among coders or among tech people, so their first thought is idiot.
Yeah, who's this musician?
He'll never make it.
He'll never make it. Exactly.
Right. Well, that's incredible. That is a classic pivotal moment. I mean, is that? I mean, do you have any? Did you have anything else that you feel like really shaped you that dramatically? That's pretty significant.
It is. I will say this, and and part of this has been, my career progression, which again, I have to say was almost quite by accident. I didn't just like the thing that was never by accident was music. That was a part of me very young, and I was so committed to it. I spent more money than you could possibly imagine on a custom set of Rogers USA Neil Peart sized drums, because drums were big back then, really big.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I spent a bunch of money on this beautiful kit, and really poured myself into it. But so that wasn't by accident, but everything else seemed to be. And even falling into supply chain, this was the thing about supply chain, is it's incredibly simplistic in its purpose. It doesn't take you a long time to explain to someone, what the purpose of this supply chain is. But the arithmetic is wildly complex when you add it all together. The dynamics of human, interaction and so on is wildly dynamic in between. And so I'd say the other thing, part of my upbringing, like this notion of being open to change. Well, my career at Kinaxis, I think I've held every single position except HR and the CFO, and everything else I think I've done. And it's not, that wasn't on purpose. I didn't say, hey, I'm going to go tackle the next one. It was
Right.
my, my longtime mentor and champion, really, Doug Colbeth, who said, we have a new problem. Would you like to help solve it? And, being open to change, I lean in on problems like that. I don't lean back. I tend to lean forward and like, yeah, sure, I'll try. I'll do,
Yeah.
I'll try anything. And I think, that military upbringing, I never thought about it until now. I wasn't thinking about it every time I said, sure, put me in, coach. I'll go do that. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but in retrospect, I think part of just the nature of who I am, I'm like, sure, let's try something new. I'm happy to learn something new.
How hard could it be, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the only one to have done it. So if not me, who,
Yeah, right. I think that's a great perspective to have in that problem. In some cases, I call that the blessing of naivete.
Yes.
Right. I mean, you're not afraid of it because you don't quite understand it, and you just figure, I'll give it a shot.
That's right. You don't know what pain of failure will be because you haven't failed yet. So you just lean in. You say, I'll try it. You bet on yourself, know? And, I am a forever learner. I think when you stop learning, you start dying. And so every day is an opportunity to learn a thing. And so at every opportunity, I thought, wow, this is going to be a whole new world of learning. It's going to be incredible. And I'm an insatiable learner. I just think I'm still learning, right? You're just on a learning journey.
So I'm fascinated in your definition of failure, because I sense that you don't mean you've never failed even in the slightest. You just mean that haven't failed at this thing, or haven't ever failed completely, right?
Right. No, I think you can't trip if you're not moving. And so, this notion of just staying still and doing nothing, that's not a way to live a life, I don't think. At least for me, not for everybody.
Yeah.
For me, I thought, no, I'd like to experience new things. I'd like to learn new things. And the fascinating thing about learning is everything is compounded. What you learned yesterday is adding to what you learned today, and so on and so on and so on. And so, I think again, in retrospect, certainly not on purpose, I think about what prepared me to do the role I'm doing now. Well, I don't know. I don't know how I would be able to do the role I'm doing now if it hadn't been for learning all of those things that I'd learned over every role that I've had, right? Whether it was, we have a chief marketing officer, and Jay Muehlhofer, I think he would just die knowing that I used to run marketing. I mean, I can't run marketing, but I learned enough to know what it is.
Right.
I didn't outright fail. I failed at some things for sure.
Right.
But I've also grown a phenomenal appreciation for what that role means, and what good marketing looks like, or what good R&D looks like, or what good selling looks like. You get an appreciation for a cross section of what runs a business.
Yeah. And I think you learn enough to lead. You may not learn enough to run it, but you learn enough to lead. The foundational principles, foundationally what works or doesn't work, probably a lot of what doesn't work. Right.
Yeah.
And also a perspective for what's going through that person's mind. It's not unlike coaching, right? You almost have to play 100%. It to do it. And I love that perspective. I love that learning perspective. You're right. You're either, to quote the great philosopher, Big Tom Callahan from Tommy Boy, you're either growing or you're dying. There ain't no third direction. Right.
That's it. Yeah. No, and people should live that life. I tell everybody the same thing, because everyone is both a student and a teacher every day.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone is both. And so, everything I've learned has been through the generosity of others and their experiences. Some of it has been through my own failures, for sure. But I never fail to thank and appreciate anybody who's willing to teach me anything they've learned that I haven't. And so I tell people, be a gracious student. Okay, if somebody teaches you a thing, it's a generosity, it's a kindness they give to you, because that learning is experience, bottled up in knowledge, and you should thank them. But equally, be a gracious, be a generous teacher. Hide nothing. Pay everything forward.
Yeah.
Everything you learn, you should be completely open to teaching others that want to learn it.
So I talk to a lot of leaders, a lot of tech founders and leaders on this show, and we get a lot of incredible wisdom from folks. And at the same time, we recognize that people go through a lot of failures to get to the point that they're at, the point of success that they're at now. And I'm always fascinated by the exceptional gifts of the folks that I talk to. Honestly, this is like school for me every day. I love it. I really do. And one of the things that I've thought about in my leadership journey has been why, and I can only do it in retrospect. Other people probably understand themselves a lot better. I'm not that deep. But one of the things that I've recognized is I've got a few things that people would probably consider dysfunctions that I use to help. I channel into positivity that actually have helped me. So if you think about it from your perspective, is there anything that people could objectively call a dysfunction that you use to help you be a good leader or team member or person?
Yeah, I tend to be exceptionally organized around certain things. I have an absolute aversion to wires. Like, it's a bizarre thing, right? But maybe this is a weird thing about being a musician too. Like, everything. I think every problem is symmetrical, and everything has a place. Like, if you looked at my environment right now, even though there's two computer screens and all that, the wires are completely wrapped, so it looks like one wire, and everything is tucked away. It's impeccably organized in terms of the wiring. I don't know if that, and again, I have a recording studio in my house. Well, there's a lot of wires. If you ever walk into a recording studio, let me tell you, there's wires everywhere. Okay. Not in my studio. Okay, you can't even find out. You can't even see them. Okay, because I've meticulously hidden them away. And so I think just being that, it's almost like a razor focus on, aligning complexity, eliminating complexity in any kind of situation. I think it's one of those things that I do naturally. I'll give you an example, okay, that's sort of business related. Okay, people will tell me, well, how complex is selling? I said, there's only 3 steps to selling anything. Okay, step 1, generate interest and intrigue. That's it. That's step 1. You can't sell anything if you can't generate any interest or intrigue.
Right.
So there's something about the human condition. You can't ignore being intrigued by something.
Right.
Okay. Step 2, trust and confidence. That's it. Just build trust and confidence. And step 3 is respect. There's just 3. Those are the 3 phases. People put these long processes together and so on. I tend to think about things in very simplistic, very clean lines,
Yeah.
So again, maybe it's the wiring aversion I have. I don't function well, whether a studio environment or a work environment, when things are unnecessarily complex.
Occam's razor.
Yeah.
Simplest answer is usually the best one, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably what allows you to take on new tasks at all times, is you think of them in or break them down into very simple concepts.
Yeah. And it's not unlike software engineering. Software engineering is all about taking wildly complex circumstances and formulating, if you will, it's almost a picture of what the components of a problem actually are in their macro state.
Hmm.
Working on that first, I think really helps. It's the abstraction process, I guess. How do you abstract very complex problems and simplify the nature of them? The sales process is just an example. How do I take a complex environment? I know it's complex. Great. Okay. I'm going to simplify it into these very simplistic. The nature of a selling process involves these three quite obvious, to me anyway, stages.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and everybody has to break things down into the way that their mind operates, right? Into the way that they work. And if that radical simplicity is what's necessary for you or for someone, then you've got to go with it. And that's the whole point of that question, John, is whatever that thing is that drives you. You could argue that's obsessive compulsive. You could argue it's a lot of things, right? But the truth is, if you can make it work for you and work for good, then go with it, right?
Yeah.
I think people spend a whole lot of their lives fighting that thing that is defined as something, maybe a dysfunction or a disadvantage or whatever it is. They fight that thing their whole life, and then they realize that that thing can actually become, or maybe actually is already, their strength.
100%. I still cut my own grass, but I'll tell you, in advance of starting that process, I already have a pattern in mind. It's like that, right? I look at it and go, no, you don't just cut the grass. You create a pattern, and you can create beauty out of it. Something as simple as cutting your grass. At the end of it, you can look at it and go, the grass isn't just cut; it looks beautiful. I can see exactly the diagonal pattern or the circular pattern you were making here or whatever, right? So
I think for people in technology, there's a lot of therapy in cutting grass.
Yes.
At least there is for me, because we don't deliver anything physical, John. I mean, we deliver results that hit a balance sheet, right? We don't really deliver anything physical. And I love both the symmetry and the physical reinforcement that you've accomplished something of seeing one row of grass lower than the other, right? And okay, so on that front, let's really get off track. Do you do a cleanup pass around the outer edge of the yard after you've finished?
I do, but with one of those weed eater type things, right? So the edge has to be sharp.
Very good.
No blades of grass bleeding onto the hard surfaces.
That's perfect. So I was a greens mower in college, which is like the prima donna of a golf course, and so I always do back and forth, change the direction multiple times, and then do one final pass around the outer edge with the mower even before I edge.
Nice.
And then I go stand in the street and look at my yard.
Hardcore.
And then hardcore. So, all right. So as long as we've exposed that we're in this whole technology game, let's share with us a little bit. So just so our audience knows and our community can grasp what it is that Kinaxis does, because this next part, this is the violent agreement part that I'm promising people, where we talk about supply chain and its propensities and problems and opportunities and challenges. So tell us a little bit about what Kinaxis does, just so they have a frame of reference there.
Sure. So, I like to first talk about what Kinaxis means to the world of supply chain. I think if we were to have a just cause, or, if we were to have a mission or vision for the company, we describe it as to revolutionize planning. And so you might wonder, why the revolution? Well, I think the world has become increasingly inefficient at supply chain as business, volatility increases, as the velocity of business increases. The way to absorb it has become wildly inefficient. And obviously, an inefficient supply chain means you're wasting natural resources, you're wasting energy, you're wasting cash, you're wasting talent. And so at Kinaxis, we serve the largest manufacturers in the world to tackle that waste and eliminate it, become wildly more efficient. and able to keep up with the volatility of business and the velocity of business, both of which I think are increasing.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. I mean, there, well, the volatility, hashtag COVID happened, right? I mean, 2020 is the expression of as volatile as it can get. The virtually instantaneous shutdown of society, right? I call it a seismic societal disruption, virtually overnight. You can't get more disruptive than that.
Yeah, it is an absolute global shock,
Mm-hmm.
and it's global and has hit not only businesses but families, and it's hit everyone simultaneous. It's like a tsunami in every country at the same time, in every city, happening simultaneously. And so it really starts to test the systems and the procedures and the rigor of the planet, really of the planet, right? Because supply chain makes the world go round. You know, people say,
Yeah.
oh, you know, I think supply chain practitioners are on the front line just like doctors are. How do you think doctors apply their medicine? They need all kinds of material at the right place at the right time. They need all kinds of pharmaceuticals and drugs and so on at the right place at the right time. So before you get those frontline workers, you get practitioners, supply chain practitioners, moving goods around the world. At the same time, there's this global shockwave. So I think one of the things that's emerging out of COVID is a recognition that the current systems cannot sustain this kind of a shock. You know, of course, it's never been tested before, but now it is, and you know, it's equivalent to, you know, being on an aircraft with all of its sophistication, and yet it does happen. You hit wild amount of, you know, you can hit wild turbulence at a moment's notice.
Right.
Well, first thing a pilot does is take it off autopilot, grab the yoke.
Yeah.
Right? You it's the only thing you can do. You can't run on autopilot. It's too uncertain. It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, it's too dangerous. Think of it. There's dangerous in automating complete unknown circumstances, right?
Undoubtedly. Yeah. I think of sailing, right? You can have autopilot on a sailboat, but if the waves are hitting the boat at just the right direction, the autopilot can't sustain that. Only a human can sustain that direction. And it's not dissimilar to flight, right? But yeah, absolutely. And you know, when we planned this visit to have this discussion, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about some of the things that are going on in supply chain that I think in some cases we agree are madness. In some cases we agree need to happen or needed to happen even before this seismic societal disruption. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on what's unique or unknown or really complex about supply chain, and some of those things that are changing or need to change, or even perspectives that have held us back from change. What jumps immediately to mind?
Well, first, I would say that it isn't a technological discussion that should be happening. Just flat out. You know, I think, you know, thinking that we have the wrong technology, I think is flawed. I mean, that's not the point of learning about the condition that we're in right now. I think we have flawed techniques. Okay, I think the manner, you know, what governs supply chain, what has been governing supply chains for the last 30 years, which by the way, were better than the previous 30, okay?
True.
Which were, you know, those were better than the previous. I mean, look, supply chain's been around as long as humanity has, and so it's gone through continuous improvement over that time. It's obvious. So, you know, as society grows and as society matures, as the world shrinks, you know, due to travel and the internet and you know, all of those commercial elements, so must supply chains. They have to learn to absorb the conditions that are changing every day. I think what we're learning, the big macro thing that we're learning, is that this obsession, this absolute madness obsession for accuracy has been at the expense of agility. And this global shockwave is highlighting in absolute stark, obvious bright lights what it feels like to have an agility muscle that is completely atrophied.
Yeah.
And that's the macro lesson, I think, that everyone is feeling. Things that you knew to be absolutely certain yesterday can no longer be trusted.
Yeah.
And so the only way to combat that kind of a circumstance is to have a healthy dose, a healthy competency in responding to the uncertain. And that is basically what agility is, right? I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever does, I can move fast enough to course correct and absorb it and not have it hurt.
Yeah.
I think that's the macro level learning. And it's the thing that makes this so interesting is that the learning is uniform across every country, every vertical, every manufacturer, big, small, medium, doesn't matter. They're suffering in the same manner.
Well, I think what's interesting is you said atrophy. I would argue it was nearly ignored agility. We've both been doing this for, let's just say, around 2 decades, John. How about that?
Mhm.
Can we
Yeah.
agree? Okay, that's good. So what I have seen is this, as you said, obsession with accuracy, and that's usually specifically around the forecast, trying to predict what is going to happen. 7 or 13 or 55 algorithms that try to determine what the forecast for demand is going to be, right? And all these algorithms that try then to optimize or minimize, more often minimize the inventories against that forecast, right? And a near, I don't know, a near, I don't know how to say it. I mean, we nearly ignore the fact that you can actually respond effectively while not having and maybe not even expecting an accurate forecast, because there are, as wise people have often said, there are 2 kinds of forecasts: lucky and wrong, right?
Yeah.
and we obviously don't hardly ever get lucky.
That's right.
Right?
It's like playing the lottery, right?
Yeah.
How many times do you have to play to win? Probably you'll never win.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a lawyer tell me, and I don't know why he was such a statistical expert. He said, if the chances of winning are 1 in 350 billion, you haven't appreciably increased your odds just by buying a ticket.
That's right. No, 100% right. And that's a wise lawyer.
Yeah.
There's such a thing.
Very
Yeah.
wise lawyer. Also an artist in his own right.
Awesome.
So,
I would say this, and look,
yeah.
I think the problem hasn't necessarily been forecasting. It's been this notion that somehow it alone can
Yes.
harness the volatility of the planet, that all the assumptive parameters you can apply to it. And the other absolute red herring, is this notion that the assumptive parameters that drive your forecast are actually accurate. They're not.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I'll tell you this. You have to know whether you're going north or west or east. You have to have some direction. And so to the extent that the mathematics behind forecasting help, is they kind of give you directionally where you need to be going. And that's important.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to guess that. It's wonderful to have technologies out there that can say, you're roughly moving in this direction. And it makes sense. It's a viable and defensible direction to be going based on where you've been and where you want to go and all the good things. Good. The notion, though, that the forecast error could be absorbed by more forecasting, well, that's absurd. And again, this is where I think we've had this terrific imbalance between, what I'll call the pure math-based models without the human ingenuity, the human creativity, the human judgment applied to it. And I think there's fewer and fewer people now that believe that, a pure, algorithmic approach to running a supply chain for the rest of time,
right,
is the right way to go.
yeah, I agree. And I think the notion that one or a collection of humans can create a collection of algorithms that no humans will ever need to intervene upon again is folly, isn't it? I mean,
It is.
what makes those humans that much smarter? And frankly, some of the forecasting techniques that we use in supply chain, some of them are over 100 years old, and they're actually constructed based on the presumption of absence of data, not presence of data. And we have so much more access to data these days that we need to rethink even those brilliant algorithms. And if we've learned anything, John, if we've learned anything in 2020, it is, to quote every stockbroker advertisement you've ever seen, the past is no indication of future success.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
it's absolutely true.
There's no forecasting technique that looks at the past could have predicted 2020. Of course, no forecasting technique, by the way, could have, but nothing that has looked at the past could do that. I've coined this phrase postcasting, which is looking at history and expecting that to be a representation of the future without any other context.
Right.
Right. And that is a fallacy that has held us back for decades, centuries, arguably, in supply chain.
Right. So I think what we're learning is it's not an indictment against forecasting, because it has its place.
Right.
It's an indictment, though, that the ultimate breakthrough and the ultimate, I'd say generational improvement required today can continue to ignore agility. And as soon as you start talking about, well, how do you strengthen an agility muscle? Well, it's not like strengthening even your physical muscles. You can't say I'm going to start, bench pressing and hopefully my legs will get stronger. Well, no, there's specific way to exercise a particular muscle group, and as it relates to agility, and when you start to see where, a lot of the world's greatest practitioner thought leaders, if you will, they're starting to apply that thinking now. They're starting to realize that, it isn't that there's something wrong with forecasting, or there's something wrong with math-based models to predict where the world will be. It's, the wisdom is saying ignoring the techniques that make you more agile, okay, is where disaster lives.
Yeah.
Like, that's where companies will ultimately fail.